Live stream. All right, he's got it and we're live streaming.
All right, good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. I call this RRTPO TAC meeting to order. Second item on the agenda is statement regarding virtual meetings. Mr. Parsons.
Thank you. The statement is consistent with the same one we've been using for years now. So we can move forward unless anyone on the call has questions.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Hearing none, Ms. Firestone, if we could still proceed with the roll call and certification of a quorum, please. And I think you already certified there was a quorum, but please proceed with roll call.
Yes, ma'am. Town of Ashland, Miss Amos.
Here.
Mr. Tucker. Charles City County, Mr. Mitchell. Miss Russell. I know we have Miss Russell. I will mark her as present. She may be having audio problems. Chesterfield County, Miss Smith.
Here.
Miss Walker.
Here.
Goochland County, Mr. Goyne.
Here.
Mr. Coleman. Hanover County, Mr. Vadunez. Mr. Flagg. Henrico County, Chair Smidler.
Here.
Mr. Yor. New Kent County, Ms. LeDuc. Powhatan County, Mr. Shardine. City of Richmond, Ms. Clark. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. RRTP, Ms. Dubinsky.
Here.
Mr. Wagner. GRTC, Ms. Fink.
Here.
Mr. Robinson. Plan RVA, Mr. Parsons.
Here, and I'm trying to move Mr. Robinson and Mr. Vadunas over.
Okay. Mr. Ariel. Ride Finders, Ms. Tisdale. Mr. O'Keefe.
Here.
RMTA, Ms. Simmons. VDOT, Ms. McAdory.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. And Ms. Mueller.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance. And again, we do have a quorum.
Thank you. And you have Mr. Vadunas and GRTC, Ms. Robinson as attending as well.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
great. Thank you. Next on the agenda is number 4, consideration of amendments to the meeting agenda. Are there any proposed amendments?
Yes, Madam Chair. We do have one suggestion for item 13 related to FY 24 to 27 TIP projects list. Things are delayed a bit in getting that information. So we'd like to give an update on the schedule, but change it to an information item instead of action requested.
Okay. That sounds good. Or is a roll call, not a roll call vote, a voice vote acceptable, Chet, for that amendment change to the agenda?
Yes, that would be fine.
All those in favor of modifying item number 13 to be informational instead of action, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, hearing none. We have amended the agenda accordingly. Number 5 on the agenda is approval of the December 13th TAC meeting minutes. We can do a voice vote with this. Chet, do we need to do a motion and then a voice vote, or?
It'd probably be worth a motion, please.
Would anybody like to make a motion for approval of the December 13th TAC meeting minutes?
This is John O'Keefe. I'll make that motion for the approval of the TAC minute meetings from December.
Thank you. Any second?
I'll second. This is Austin.
Thank you, Austin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstain or have any modifications? All right, hearing none. Number 6 on the agenda is open public comment period. Don't see anything in the Q&A. And don't see anything in the chat. Mr. Parsons, or have we received any comments prior to this meeting?
We haven't. We do have a few attendees that are not members. I would remind everyone, if you are attending the meeting virtually and do have questions or comments, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and staff will be monitoring that. I know of a couple of the folks in the wings are on staff with the city relating to the agenda items that are further down, so we may move them over if the committee would like that once we get to those items.
Okay, thank you. Number 7 is the TAC chairman's report. I don't have a formal report today. So the next item is number 8, RRTPO update. Mr. Parsons and then Mr. Ariel will provide an update on the 2050 socioeconomic data work group.
Yes, thank you. I'm actually going to do that update
Okay.
on the work group. Mr. Ariel had an appointment. The staff has been working on employment distribution of the 2050 data to the TAZs, and is targeting to finish that work and send it to each of you for locality review this month. The data work group will have a meeting scheduled following that review to approve the data sometime probably in mid to late February. And then we are aiming for TAC approval in March. And this is, as you know, this is kind of one of the first steps to gearing up for the next long range plan, as well as this socioeconomic data will be feeding into our scenario planning project, which has kicked off and is underway. So this is important, and it's one of the things that we had hoped to finish a little bit earlier, but some staffing issues got in the way, and we've had to reallocate some time for some of the folks on our staff. So the schedule that I just provided is solid, and we're hoping to get that to you so that we can bring it back to the TAC for action in March. The other thing that I wanted to raise, most people on the call have probably seen it, but there is keen interest from the policy board to take a look at cost estimating, especially related to the programs that the TPO provides funding for, to get a better understanding of why costs are escalating and changing as much as they are. This is an item that the policy board asked staff to take a look at. If you were present or tuned in to the last policy board meeting last Thursday, Mr. Bushing provided a very comprehensive look at all of the projects that we are currently involved with that do receive funds, most notably RSTP CMAC, but others as well, and provided an overview of what that might possible actions for the TAC. So that's why this is important for TAC, because of the suddenness of the meeting in relation to scheduling this meeting. We were not able to take the direction from the policy board last week and update the agenda for today, just because of the lack of time between the two meetings. But we plan on having this as a major agenda item for the February TAC meeting as an information item, and then allow time for review and discussion amongst TAC members, and then move to some type of recommendation from the TAC. We'll put that on the schedule for the March meeting so that the policy board can have a recommendation on how or if it should move forward with any type of changes to guidelines or policies or procedures that the TPO currently follows relating to cost estimates and other things. I guess as an aside, the CBTA TAC met yesterday, and there are a couple items related to these cost estimates that are directly impacting the CBTA decisions, most notably third-party cost estimate validation and some other things that are in the CBTA regular schedule calendar. So that's something that that TAC is watching as well. So this impacts everyone, and just wanted to give you an update this morning that you should be expecting this type of information and can plan on having a time for a full discussion in February.
Thank you, Chet, for that update. Any questions for Chet? All right, hearing none, let's move on to item number 9. Ms. Ryan will be presenting about the Commonwealth Transportation Board 2023 safety targets, aspirational safety performance goals. Please go ahead, Ms. Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, TAC.
Your volume's a little low. I'm not sure if it's just me.
It's low. Can you hear me
Okay,
better now?
Yes, I can hear you better now. Thank you.
Maybe my hand was in the way. I will try to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. I am here for my annual presentation to you regarding performance measures, and I'm asking action from TAC today in reviewing these 2 letters of performance measures and recommending that the TPO Policy Board approve them. The first letter is due on February 27th, having to do with safety performance measures, and the second letter is not due till March, and that is the asset condition measures. Safety, these are some statistics on it. We are going again with VDOT's goal % reductions, and this shows our trend line values and then the values that we get when putting these goal reductions into the safety tool. So those are the numbers we will be reporting to VDOT. These are the asset condition system performance targets that VDOT has set and RRTPO's performance for the past few years. We're doing pretty well in all areas except for bridges, and perhaps the new funding for bridges will help with that, and we can program towards those projects in the future. And so this is the request before TAC. I can't, well, let me see, I can read it from here if I should. No, actually, I can't see it all on my screen. So does the action need to be read aloud?
Madam Chair, I can read it. TAC requested action. TAC is requested to review and provide a recommendation to the policy board on the following resolution. Whereas the RRTPO is required under MAP 21 and the FAST Act to submit updated safety performance measure targets annually and asset condition and system performance targets every 4 years. Therefore, be it resolved that the RRTPO policy board submits the following letters. The annual submission of RRTPO safety target letter to VDOT as required by federal regulations. The quadrennial submission of RRTPO asset condition and system performance targets letter to OIP as required by federal regulations.
Are there any questions for Ms. Ryan? Would anyone like, go ahead.
Just one question, Sharon. Just to clarify, so what's being reported are the actual measures for the year against the performance targets that have already been established. We're not establishing new targets. This is just simply reporting the performance among those targets.
No, it's really more the accepting the targets that VDOT has set. And then, because the safety targets are set every year, and that just shows how we perform against them. And then the system performance measures are just updated every 4 years, although VDOT has the opportunity to update them after 2 years, in which we would have to come back and agree with those updates. But yeah, you're agreeing to the targets and then the numbers at which we are assuming we will be at.
Thank you. So it's a little, so we do have the discretion to recommend different targets. Is that correct?
Yes, we do.
Okay, all right. I'm not going to suggest different targets, but I just was trying to understand that there is more of a decision here for this body to modify those if we so wanted to recommend, which I do not. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Ms. Smith, go ahead.
I agree with Joe's summary right there, but I did want to go back to the safety page where we've got the proposed targets. That VDOT, those VDOT targets, I guess. So for fatalities, we're saying it's okay if they go up 3.7 because that's going to be lower than what they're trending, I guess.
Not really. I'm not sure. The safety department and VDOT is looking at where they're expecting the fatalities to fall, not really where they're hoping. So that's how the CTB kind of was saying we need to be aspirational instead of just kind of mapping out where we're seeing the trend going. So this target is really where they're seeing the trend going. And to see that trend go lower is hopefully we've programmed projects which will improve safety.
So in a way, the 3.7 is to kind of keep it flat in a way, or to.
No, the 3.7 is more showing what they expect will actually happen.
And then the CTB approved aspirational goals, which are to decrease. Oh, can't hear you.
What was that?
Can't hear you.
Oh, that it would decrease by about 2%. Yes.
Okay.
That's what the highway safety report has as a goal. So.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions about this presentation and about the requested action? Would anybody like to make a motion or a modified motion for this action item?
I'll make a motion to recommend submitting the letters for the safety targets and the asset and system performance targets.
Thank
I will
you.
second that.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none. This was a voice vote. All those in favor, please indicate aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Hearing none, that passes. Number 10 on the agenda is the fiscal year 21 to 24 TIP amendment request for UPC 121 682 I-64 Ashland Interchange IAR. Mr. Bushing, please go ahead.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of TAC. So this is the first of 4 items I have for you today. So this is a request from VDOT to amend the TIP to add the I-64 Ashland Road IAR. As you all may recall, this is a project that was funded by RSTP in a previous cycle. And we, a couple years back, pushed the funding out to FY24 to allow that project a little more time to develop and then get started with the IAR. With the recent economic development opportunity, we have transferred money, swapped it around, and moved it forward to FY23. And so we're ready to start the IAR now. So this TIP amendment is kind of the next step in allowing that to move forward. Just as a reminder, we have to go through the constraint, demonstration, conformity determination, public review, and then TAC and policy board approval. So the project is $360,000 study, FY23, as I mentioned, so $288,000 federal, $72,000 in state match, and it is exempt for air quality purposes as a planning and technical study. The action requested is 2 parts. First is to note that it is to amend the TIP to add the project. The second is to note that it's exempt under all the conformity rules, so we don't even have to think about it. And then again, this is just a recommendation to the policy board for their final approval at the February policy board meeting. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions about the IAR.
Any questions for Miles? Barb, please go ahead.
So it's not really a new project. It's just moving the money into the window of the TIP.
Correct. So it's an existing RSTP project. We're just finally putting it into the TIP.
Got it. Thank you.
And
Hey,
so Miles, go ahead.
This is John O'Keefe. I just had a quick question. I know there's a park and ride at that location. Will that one still be there, or will that go away with any changes to that location?
Miles, I can answer that. The park and ride that's existing today is already slated under a different UPC that VDOT's undertaking to be relocated to the south side of the interchange. It's currently on the north side of the interchange. So that's actually a separate project in and of itself.
Okay, thank you. Will it be the same size, Austin, or?
The current plan is to break it into 2 phases. Phase 1 will replace more or less in kind to the number of spaces. It's 110 some odd spaces. It's not really a uniform lot today, so it's kind of hard to count the existing number. But the plan is to be, I believe, over 200 spaces in total.
Okay, thank you.
And Miles, I had a question. Was the funding increased for this? Did it go through the application?
No, so there's been no change in the cost.
Okay.
So all we did at VDOT's request, we were able to move it forward a fiscal year. So kept the cost level, but just advanced it. And again, this is just trying to position the interchange project as favorably as possible to go through smart scale and to be able to provide for this economic development opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Bushing? All right, hearing none, would anyone like to make a motion?
Hey, this is Austin. I'll move that the resolution is approved as shown.
Ms. Barb, second.
Ms. Firestone, could we please take a roll call vote?
Yes, ma'am. Miss Amos,
Aye.
Miss Russell,
Aye.
Miss Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goins,
Aye.
Vice Chair Vadunez,
Aye.
Ms. Dubinsky,
Aye.
Miss Sink. Do we still have Miss Sink with us?
I believe she might have stepped away for a moment.
Okay, Mr. Robinson,
Aye.
Mr. Parsons,
Aye.
Mr. O'Keefe,
Aye.
and Miss McAdory.
Aye.
Madam Chair, Ms. Clark is here as well.
And you missed Enrico.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chair Smidler
Aye.
and Miss Clark. Ms. Clark,
Aye. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Morning.
That motion carries.
Thank you. Great. Number 11 on the agenda is the fiscal year 21-24 TIP amendment request. GRTC bus stop amenities. Mr. Bushing, please go ahead.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. So this is a TIP amendment request from GRTC. It's not adding a new project. This is just updating the obligations on one of the existing projects, GRTC 005, which is the bus stop amenities. Essentially, in short, what this amendment is proposing is to take FTA 5339 funding, which was freed up by the federal discretionary grant that GRTC was awarded. A couple months back, we acted on that side of things, but because that funding was no longer needed for the bus replacements, it's being placed on the bus stop amenities project. So basically, same thing. We have to demonstrate constraint, public review, TAC review, and TPO approval. So this is a summary of the areas that are changing with this amendment. So we're adding the FTA 5339 funding, which was not previously on this project, so 1.4 million. And then there's an increase in the state match and local match that are on the project. And that's part of coming with the 5339 essentially. So the action that is requested is again recommendation on the following resolution. It's to update the planned obligations, and it would obligate the 1.4 million in 5339, revise the state funds from 347,000 to 3.7 million, and revise local funds from 51,000 to 251,000, all in fiscal year 23. I'm happy to answer any questions about this. If there are any questions about how the money was freed up, anything on that side. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Bushing about this item? All right, not seeing any hands raised or any voices raising any questions. All right, would anyone like to make a motion?
This is Tiffany. I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Any second?
This is Liz.
Thank you, Liz and Tiffany. Ms. Firestone, would you please do a roll call vote?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Amos,
Aye.
Ms. Russell,
Aye.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goring,
Aye.
Vice Chair Vadunez,
Aye.
Chair Smidler,
Aye.
Ms. Clark,
Aye.
Ms. Dubinsky,
Aye.
Ms. Sink.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Parsons,
Aye.
Mr. O'Keefe,
Aye.
and Ms. McAdory.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you, Ms. Firestone. Next on the agenda is item 12, fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 29 STBG CMAQ allocations, existing projects request. Mr. Bushing will be presenting. I know we had talked about this at our October TAC meeting, but go ahead, Mr. Bushing.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. So this is the longest item I have for you today. So I'm just going to go through a brief summary of what we're asking for today, the staff recommendation on the existing project requests, and then just a reminder of the TAC action, and then open up at that point to any discussion on that. So the background, the existing project applications were held back in September. The request for STBG funds or RSTP funds exceeded $14 million. Our estimate at the staff level for what would be available for this upcoming year is about 18.2. So it's the majority, the vast majority of the funds would be committed if all of these were awarded. In October, the TAC had a lengthy discussion about this, And the direction was for staff to follow up with project sponsors for additional detail, come back with some more project history and those details provided by the localities, and then provide recommendations for the January meeting. So that brings us to where we are today. In your packets, you have 2 attachments. The first attachment is the summary of what was submitted by each of the applicants. The second attachment is the staff analysis of the requests and staff recommendations. So the first project in there is UPC 13551. This is Hanover County Route 360 widening. This chart that you're seeing here, Mr. Parsons mentioned a presentation to the policy board last week. So this is the information they had requested, was a breakdown by phase and the project histories for everything in our active program. So we're going to be using these moving forward for all existing project requests. But this shows the cost over time. I mean, you can see the RSTP allocations have been relatively flat, and then the last year and then now this year, requests for additional funding kind of trailing the cost increases that we've seen with inflation. So the cost increase in this case was due to the project being bid and the bids coming in higher than expected. And the project is moving forward. Again, this is a legacy project. The TPO funding was stable for about a decade until last year when recent COVID inflation really started impacting the project. The locality did note in the application that there was funding available for this request locally. So because of that, staff is not recommending awarding the funding. The request in this case was $1.6 million. Given the amount, the decision to award it would need to go to the policy board. So if TAC does recommend funding, the policy board makes the final decision on this one. The next project that we had was Commerce Road improvements. This is UPC 15958 in the city of Richmond. This project is one that had a history before the TPO was involved. We got involved in 2014. And funding was pretty stable up through 2019. And then in the past 5 years, we've had 3 separate requests for at least $3 million. The project's escalated pretty significantly. As you can see, it was under $15 million in 2019. We're over $35 million now. And the TPO has taken on an increasing share of the cost over that period. This one was bid previously, so that you all may recall, we took action, I believe it was last December, or 2 Decembers ago now, in 2021 at the TAC level and then in the policy board, to award additional funding to try and help that project advance after those bids, but we weren't able to get to construction at that time. So this is a rebid for this project that's coming up in this next year. Given the long history and the rapid increases in recent years, staff is not able to recommend funding for this project. However, if the TAC does decide to award funding, our recommendation does have a $1.3 million figure in there, which would maintain the TPO's current cost share of the project, so covering the same share that we have previously. The other thing that we would highly recommend is that any awards be contingent on the project advancing to construction. So we don't wind up, with another bid cycle and then a couple more years of escalation afterwards. The next project is a third legacy project. This is Jenk Road improvements in the city of Richmond, UPC 19035. This project, as you can see here, in 2012 was really when we kind of kicked off. In 2018, the project was bid and it actually went through the full award process, but ultimately the contract was rescinded and it didn't move into construction. And there's been a long history since then as the project's been refined and rescoped. And then with recent inflation, the costs have gone up again. So the request on this one is $3 million to be able to move into construction. And again, just like with Commerce Road, this would be in the next year. So this is a pretty quick turnaround toward construction. One of the key things to note is the costs escalated significantly since the award issues prevented construction. So it's been a 56% cost increase since that time. So that is a large concern for the staff side. So we're not able to recommend the funding for this request either due to the post-bid history and the escalation in cost. Again, this one will need to go to the policy board if any funding is recommended at the level requested. But we do recommend if the TAC does decide to move forward with the cost share to move this project to construction, that the funds be contingent on moving to construction in FY24. The next project is Deepwater Terminal Road Extension. So this is another City of Richmond project. As you can see, we at the TPO were involved starting in 2019. And it was about a 50% of the cost was picked up by the TPO at the time. Over time, our share of the project costs have increased. And so the current request was 1.75 million, but the actual deficit is only 412,000. So we put both in here to show kind of the options available to the TAC or the range of what could potentially be needed. In this case, it's a split. If it's the 412,000 award, it would be a TAC decision, and that would be the final decision. If it's the larger amount, the 1.7 that was requested, it would go through the policy board and require policy board approval. Given the small amount and the fact that the funding is not needed right away, staff recommends that this one not be funded because there are other local resources that are able to address this. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that at the end of the presentation. The next one is a Henrico County project, North Parham Road Signal and Sidewalk, UPC 109194. This one is a sort of an interesting case. So the TPO was involved with a $5 million estimate originally. It went through the smart scale process and the estimate dropped. So that's kind of the lower figure you see starting in 2020. And then with recent COVID impacts, the costs have gone back up and they've actually exceeded the $5 million now. So there's a small deficit on this one, a little over $200,000. The locality has picked it up with a no post, I believe, to date, but just to keep the project moving forward. And so the request is to go back in and fill the funding and make the project whole. Again, this is a TAC level decision. So this one is, TAC would be the final decision here, and it would just be incorporated into our funding plan. Staff's recommendation, again, because it's such a small amount, is to not fund this. And I'll go, again, as I mentioned, into the policy a little bit later on that. The next one we have is Route 1 improvements in the town of Ashland, UPC 112042. This is a project that's been around since 2019. Seen pretty steep cost increases. You can see it's nearly doubled in cost over that period. This one is almost exclusively funded by the TPO. The policy board would be the final decision here. Staff does recommend funding in this case, and the reason is essentially the lack of local funding to cover the deficit. So there's not a viable local source to pick up this cost increase. And that increase, I should go back, is 2.75 million on this one is what's being asked for. TAC may also want to consider requesting an additional local commitment. So the TAC could decide to do something less than the 2.7 and request some level of local share in this cost increase as well. The next one is Chesterfield County Early Settlers Sidewalk. This one is a $100,000 increase. You can see there hasn't been any change to date on the project, but it's a $100,000 increase to recognize current cost inflation. Again, this one would be a TAC decision as the final decision, and staff does not recommend funding it, again, due to the availability of local funds for the small deficit. And then we have Libby Avenue Road Diet in Henrico. This is another case where there's a no post in place to keep the project moving forward. So we penciled in kind of the range here. The deficit is minus the no post. The red, the request, is including the current deficit plus the no post. So The intent from the locality was always to have the TPO pick it up, but as you can see in 2022, the estimate went up, and they've continued moving it forward by covering it via no post. This one would require the policy board approval because it is such a small amount. The staff does not recommend funding, again, because of the amount of the deficit or the request and the availability of local funds. The last one on here is the TPO's scenario planning pilot, which Mr. Parsons was updating you on a little earlier. This one was originally selected back in 2021, and the project was recently went through an RFP process and awarded, and the estimates came in significantly higher than was originally estimated when we had it scoped out at first. So there's two lines on here. One is the request, which is essentially the current contract plus a little contingency, and the other is just the current contract. So that's kind of the purple versus the red there. This would, again, have to go to the policy board. Much like the Ashland project, there is no other viable source of funding for the TPO to use. So this one we were able to recommend funding the request. And again, we provided both figures for the TAC to discuss. So moving into kind of the discussions about funding and funding availability, the TPO's policy is that in general, cost overrun should be addressed through other funding sources available to the locality. That's what's written in our guidelines. And staff's view is that the CVTA local pot is now your primary local source for transportation funding. So that's what we looked at in trying to make these evaluations. And our assessment was that the projected CVTA revenues can largely cover these requests with very small, minimal impacts to most of your programs. In the case of the three legacy projects that we talked about at the beginning, there's larger deficits, they would have larger impacts. But the complicated histories or the availability of funding is what led to the recommendation not to fund it. So this is the updated CVTA revenue projections from last month, December 2022. You can see 228 million going all the way up to 253 million in FY29. We then took the local share distribution that was in the last fiscal year in FY22 and applied it across the board to calculate what the estimated local distributions would be across the 6-year program for each locality, which allows us to ultimately look at your request and determine what is that impact in terms of the local pot and what would that cost the locality to cover it. So as I mentioned, for the three legacy projects, they have relatively large impacts, 5% for the Hanover project and then 9, almost 10%, and then 7.5% for the two City of Richmond projects. But for most of the smaller requests, if we're looking at the deficits, it's 1% or less of the CVTA pot in the fiscal years that's needed. So staff's position on this was we felt that this was reasonable to be covered by the locality using CVTA local funds. Obviously, we can't make that decision for you, but the recommendation not to fund was that there is, in fact, other revenue available that could be used to address these needs. The one exception here was the Ashland project. As you can see, it's 353% of the available funds for the town of Ashland. So we felt that was reasonable to move forward with additional TPO funding in this case. So I know that was a lot, and I'm happy to switch through the slides, but what we're asking from TAC today is to provide a recommendation for each of these projects on what, if any, additional funding should be awarded. The goal of this is for us to be able to incorporate it into the draft allocations plans that will come back to you. Tentatively, those are scheduled for February. So that's the goal here, is to get something that we can put in there before we start looking at the new projects and slotting those in. And of course, staff can follow the TAC, or TAC can follow the staff recommendation, or the TAC can, on a case-by-case basis, decide to go in a different direction. So just wanted to make sure all those options are available, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Also happy to move through slides to facilitate the discussion as needed.
Thank you, Mr. Bushing. I know I have questions, but I know I'm going to let others go first. And I see Ms. Clark has her hand raised. Go ahead, Dirana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Miles, I have a couple questions. I guess the first one is simply, if we don't spend the 14 million of the available 18 million, what happens to those funds?
Sure. So those would then be available to program on the new project applications that were submitted for this round. So we have, I can't remember, I think it's 25 applications off the top of my head. So we would be able to select additional projects rather than a $4 million pot for the new projects. We'd have up to the full 18.
Okay, and I guess we can get a little bit clarity on that later in just how the new requests versus the existing projects, because I know, like for Richmond at least, we didn't submit new projects because we wanted the existing projects. And I'm just trying to see now that this, it just opens this new funding cycle without really still addressing project shortfalls. And then Chet, just quick note, if you could send the new VDOT projections for CVTA to me or to the group, that would be great. And then I guess my question is, I mean, I didn't see the code in the distribution of the CVTA local funds being the data being utilized to reject funding of, SCBG projects. I do find that a little intrusive on the local government's 50% that's being utilized, and whether or not any of the projects that are being requested are regional in form. I mean, they are coming through the TPO, and hence why regional funding isn't considered another source in this scenario that you are that you've presented. Was that considered at all?
Sure. So, I mean, I guess to address the 2 points there, in terms of the local funding source, the intent here is, again, not to say that that is the route you have to fund these projects with. The intent is to show that there is additional funding that can be considered that on the applications, in most cases, wasn't even mentioned. So the intent here is, again, to say there are other funding sources available to localities. In the past, we would always recommend that localities look at secondary funds, for example, where those were viable. There hasn't ever been a dedicated source of funding that we knew everyone had access to. So this is a kind of a game changer in terms of the situation with respect to availability of some level of local funding to address these projects.
If I could say though, access to and what it's been committed to, I think again is directing the locality into choosing and having to replace programs or projects that have already been programmed with those funds. I mean, for the city of Richmond, ours is heavily used for maintenance and operations of our roadways, and to then tell us, maybe we shouldn't pave our local streets because we could use that money for this request, I think again is a little bit overstepping. Again, was looking at any of the regional dollars, CVTA regional dollars also looked at as another source?
No, and the reason CVTA regional was not considered is the same reason we don't recommend, for example, go after smart scale, because that's a whole application cycle that isn't able to address these projects in the timely manner that's needed to keep them moving forward. The local funding, it was just different in that case because it is available to be programmed.
Okay, so the lack of application process. Awesome. No other viable. I think that's all I have at this moment. I will pass it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Diana. Barb, go ahead.
Yeah, I have to agree that, assuming that there is CBT local sitting available to fill gaps on RSTP and CMAQ projects is a really big assumption. We're using CBTA for projects that are active. So we've got projects that it's programmed to, they're moving along, and we're reserving money that we can use to address overages with those projects. And, so we're facing the same kind of issues that you're seeing with CMAQ and RSTP with inflation and the market. So we're stretched thin with CBT local already. It's programmed to projects. It's not just sitting there ready to fill gaps on RSTP CMAQ projects. I would like to go through the project sort of one-on-one and be able to ask some questions. But we can do that after everyone has a chance to ask general questions.
Yes, I agree with going through them one by one, Barb. Does anybody else have any questions? All right, I'm gonna go ahead.
Dorona has
Okay.
something.
Dorona, is your hand up?
No, I meant to put it down, but yeah, I do want to go through the projects as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So we'll go through that. I just wanted to go over a few things that I had concerns about. Miles, after this meeting, if you could put this presentation up on the webpage, so we have the recommendation slides. Yeah, Enrico has the same concerns that the city of Richmond referenced and Chesterfield. It's a big assumption that we're going to use CBTA local funds to cover the shortfall. For example, Henrico did not apply for our legacy projects like our 3 Chop Road improvements and our Sadler Road improvements because we know we've been coming back. And so we were going to try to cover that with CBTA local. And we knew there was only a limited amount of STBG funding. So that's why we came back with these smaller amounts for Parham Sidewalk and Signals project, which is partly smart scale funded as well. So it's not only TPO funded. So we were trying to be respectful in how much we were asking and trying to juggle. So that is a concern. And I have a question about the Route 1 project, but maybe when we get to it, whether, revenue share or smart scale funding was looked at as an option for that. Miles, or we can wait till we go one by one, but that was one question I had.
I mean, I can answer that one just off the bat. That did go through Smart Scale, but wasn't selected. So that's been picked up through the TPO's program.
Okay.
And then for the current funding gap, this project's ready to move into construction. I think later this summer, I think is the schedule. So this is kind of one of those, we're trying to get the last pieces in order so the project is ready to go.
Okay, and so the Route 1 was looked at for smart scale, but it wasn't awarded, or was it round 4 or?
It was an earlier round, and I don't remember off the top of my head which round it was, but it wasn't selected through smart scale, and then it came through the TPO's program and was selected for RSTP instead. So it hasn't gone back through smart scale at any point.
Okay, and
Can you pull up the slide for that one?
but as far as no revenue share funding was requested for this one as well. Okay. The study, and I can maybe when we go one by one, I'll ask a question about the Plan RVA study, the increase on that. All right, Austin, your hand's raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, before we get into the individual projects, I wanted to echo what you said, Ms. Smiler, that we have a legacy project that's kind of, it's increased dramatically in cost, and we didn't purposefully come forward to the TPO because we recognized that our cost went up from $5.5 million to $15.5 million, which is currently where it's funded at, knowing we've kind of already gone through that major cost increase, and we're probably, if we're unsuccessful in smart scale for that application, we're probably going to look at allocating maybe 25% of our CBTA local funds to that specific project. And so that's a chunk of change that would be unavailable, and we certainly don't get as much as the larger localities. So I think, yeah, the assumption that CBTA local is completely available, the 30 million or 75 million that some of the counties get over the next 2 or 3 fiscal years, it's an aggressive assumption.
Thank you, Austin.
If I may jump in just on that point again, staff's intent was not to say this is how you have to program your funding. The intent was to show that funding is available and to remind everyone, the programming that we're required to follow at the TPO and at VDOT is to address existing projects that have cost increases and keep them moving forward before we move on to new projects. So that was what we were trying to remind everyone of, is that general programming approach. And mentioning the CVTA local was showing you have other resources that could potentially address this. That was all we were trying to bring up. Our intent isn't to tell you how to spend your money. It's just, it's kind of striking that balance of what part of the cost share should be the TPO compared to the localities. And that's kind of the conversation we wanted to bring up. And I hope we don't get too distracted on the side. And, it's obviously the tech can discuss that as much as needed, but our intent was really to say there are alternatives on how to address these projects. And that was kind of what we were trying to raise here.
Good point. Thank you, Miles. And, we appreciate your effort, the Plan RVA's effort, looking into this. And I know, we've all been directed by the TPO, to look at these, funding requests for existing projects and why the costs are increasing. I think I saw Barb's hand first and then Dirona. Go ahead, Barb.
Oof, I lost some of my train of thought.
Sorry.
First was, I definitely agree that we need to fund our existing projects as the priority. So hopefully we'll be able to run through each project and come up with a plan. And I also really appreciate the comments from the other jurisdictions, showing that there is a lot of thought that goes on with jurisdictions when we're making these requests to CMAQ and RSTP. So it's not like we're just coming without any consideration to all of the programs that we've got going, whether it's RSTP, CMAQ, or revenue sharing or CBT local. There's a lot of thought that goes behind it and trying to make reasonable requests. I think that's an important thing to note, especially when we're talking to the TPO in the future on the subject. There is a reasonableness to it, even though it may not appear that way because we're faced with this kind of unprecedented inflation and market challenge.
Thank you. Dirona, go ahead, and then Austin.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Barb and what others have said, particularly with the funding of the existing projects. And so I look forward to kind of going through that. But it was one thing that Miles said that I noted in regard to like the TPO's cost share and, to a particular locality having availability of funds. I mean, I'm not sure if decision-making, again, should be based on, unless there's some written note I just don't know about in regard to what percentage of the TPO is funding and what percentage it's not. It's either, there is the funding source, which was the majority before CVTA for some projects. And again, I'm not sure how one that is TPO is the only source of funding, how that gives it another project a leg up on others. So just some clarity on that whole statement in regard to, again, when a TPO has majority funded the project, I mean, what difference does that make? in the whole scheme of things. I'm just not, I'm hearing that it does something, but I'm not sure exactly what that means when we're making decisions.
Chet or Miles, do you have a response about the TPO percentage of the project, or don't mean to?
Sure. So the intent in putting that in the agenda packet for the project analysis was not so much to show, whether it was fully TPO funded or not. It was to show whether the cost increases and then the subsequent requests were going to increase the TPO share of the costs. The idea being, if the TPO is committed to covering 50% of a project, over time, we would expect that even if the costs went up, we would either be at the same funding level we were or go up to potentially 50%, rather than taking on a larger share of the risk. Essentially, it was an analysis of how much of the risk or additional costs the TPO was carrying for those projects. That was the intent of that analysis. In the case of some of the projects like this Route 1 project, the intent, I'm mentioning it in the presentation, is that when the project was fully funded and there aren't viable alternatives, the TPO is the reasonable source for funding. So that was kind of where we were heading with that direction, was just to mention that there wasn't anything else out there that could cover it, and it was largely TPO funded. So that was all that those were intended to do. It doesn't have any real bearing on the decision making beyond, the TPO is taking on additional risk, and that's what we wanted to raise. Is as we take on more of the project, we take on more of the risk of any future cost increases.
Thank you.
Austin and Ms. Russell.
Actually, my question kind of pertains to 3 specific projects, so I'll defer to Ms. Russell until we get to those specific projects.
Okay, Ms. Russell.
Good morning. I have a question, and I've really just decided to just put myself out there and an opportunity to learn, but I'm stuck on Barb's statement about the commitment to existing projects. In light of the TPO Policy Board's discussion last week about project cost overruns and really some concerns in that area, and getting TAC, I think it's specifically CVA TAC. I didn't really understand why they didn't send it to both TACs to consider and make some recommendations, and specifically to consider the recommendations from the TPO regarding cost overruns and projects. And so I just bring that up in light of this discussion, and I guess what I'm gleaning from the discussion, that at least there is a sentiment amongst some members of TAC that regardless of cost overruns, we need to be firmly committed to existing projects. And then for a community like Charles City and other rural communities, that really puts us behind the 8 ball in terms of getting anything to move forward. And so if I'm missing something, please let me know. I mean, I'm will be very transparent and say that, I'm new to the Richmond metropolitan area. I really just I don't understand. I really don't understand. And so somebody help me.
So, Ms. Russell, I hear both parts about the commitment to existing projects and, and the TPO's directive, and it wasn't intended that we would, I think, commit to fund, all the deficits. I think there could be some compromise, but I'm going to yield the floor to Barb, since you had mentioned her name, and Nora, I still see you. I will come back. Barb, did you want to respond?
Yes, I certainly did not say that we were committed to funding existing projects at all costs. What I do want to do is go through each project and talk about the deficits and talk about the solutions and options that we have. But it certainly makes more sense to think about these existing projects before we take on new projects. And generally that is in line with my comments, is that we need to figure out what we're going to do with the existing projects in dealing with the deficits, but not necessarily just blanket funding all the deficits.
Thank you, Barb. Ms. Russell, do you have, does that answer part of your question?
Am I incorrect that the policy board asked TAC to consider recommendations for projects in light of cost overruns? And so if that's the case,
And that's what we're doing. We're going to go through each project and have that discussion. Yes.
Yes, and at the TPO, yes, as Barb said, that's what we're planning on going through right after, during this, after we talk with Nora, we'll go to going through each project. And at the TPO meeting, as Chet indicated in the secretary's report, it was directed by the TPO for TPO TAC, is my understanding, to look at project cost estimates and, you know, to evaluate why there are overruns on those 44 projects or whatever number there were. Go ahead.
so the comment relative to the commitment for existing projects, I almost feel like, you know, it's like it's a chicken and an egg. Like, should one conversation be before the other before we're considering these specific recommendations?
Okay, so I hear you. Ms. Russell, I hear you. So you kind of, yeah, so, and then the TPO request of TPO TAC, you know, to look at project cost estimates is not on this agenda. And that's been pushed back to February. Maybe you're saying we need to talk about those concurrently, I think is what I'm hearing. And I can understand that. Miles, is there an option, you know, does this require action today, or could we just make this informational and, you know, we'll get to Nora's question and go through each project on this, but does this need to have an action item today? Maybe just to address what I think Ms. Russell is saying is maybe these need to be talked about concurrently.
So to build out the allocations program, we need a number. We need a recommendation from the TAC to put the existing project additional funding on first, and then we can look at our new projects. To stay on schedule, that would be for next month. However, and Ms. McAdory can probably chime in, but I think we do have a little bit of wiggle room if we need to push it back to the next month.
That's correct. I mean, it's not ideal, but we've done that before. We can do it a little bit later. I think the draft is approved in March. And so the draft at the CTB level is approved in March. So as long as we have it for the final, you know, in May, I think would be as far as we could push it, but we can certainly discuss that.
I just don't know how we are responsive to the policymakers without that conversation, or at least the recommendation is broached with the caveat that it does not include discussion relative to addressing the specific requests of the policy board.
Madam Chair, this is Dirana.
I know Nora's being so patient.
Yes, and if you don't mind, I really have to go. So I wanted
go
to
ahead,
say a
Nora.
couple things.
Yes,
I apologize, but I have a 10:15 meeting with the school, and
yes,
Oh,
go
cut
ahead,
me off.
Nora. Thank you. Go ahead.
I was really just going to comment on Route 1, but now I just want to throw in a couple comments about the discussion. And so I wasn't at the TPO meeting, so I don't know exactly what the direction was. And so disregard anything that doesn't pertain. But it sounds like from what I'm hearing from Ms. Russell, they directed us to look at the inflation and the estimates and figure out what that's coming from. But I feel like we have a pretty, I don't know if it's a written policy, but a longstanding policy that we've all kind of agreed to of looking at existing projects and trying to fund those before we get new projects. That's a whole nother can of worms. I've been here about 15 years and that's what we've been doing. And it seemed to work out well for everyone because I think we respect each other. We respect our fellow localities, that we're not going to come in and ask for things that we can fund in other ways or that we haven't fully vetted out and figuring out the funding. We're not just throwing everything at the wall. That being said, if you don't mind me giving a minute to the Route 1 project, which is right up here on the screen for y'all. We don't have funds to do revenue sharing. We talked to VDOT about it a couple of years ago. We don't have the funds for it, honestly. And we are ready to go to construction. They're finalizing right of way now. PE's basically done. We're finalizing right of way. We're ready to go to construction. And then right like a week or two before applications are due, they send us this notice that construction costs have increased significantly. And so this is a project we've been working on since the 90s. We broke it up. It was one large project. We broke it up into 3 smaller projects. We'd love to get it off the board, but I also feel kind of guilty asking for this large amount of money for this project. But I think it is a good project for Route 1. It's a good safety project and capacity project. Happy to answer any questions in 3 minutes. And I apologize for taking you a little off track, and thank you, Ms. Clark, for giving me a second.
No, thank you, Nora, for that explanation. That was helpful to me. Does anybody have any questions while Nora's on about this specific project, Route 1 improvements? Please go ahead, and I'll come back to Dirona after, unless it's about this project.
Something I wanted to ask as we go through all the projects is whether, first of all, are you ready for advertisement? And if that's sort of where you are, have you looked at changing the scope? And Nora already talked about that. It started out as a big project and they chopped it up. So I'm imagining this has been chopped up as much as you can chop it. And we know about, in this instance, other funding sources. So this project is 100% RSTP. Is that right, Miles?
97 or something like that. There's a little bit of other funding on it.
Yeah, okay. Okay. That's the information I was kind of going after for all the projects.
All right. Hearing no other specific questions about the Route 1 application. But Nora, that was helpful, and Miles, both the information you shared about that. Dirona, please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, just quickly, I was just gonna echo what Laura said. Yeah, I think fundamentally, even in our policies, we talk about funding existing projects first. And Rhonda, when I first came into the region, again, a little bit baffled by how hard it was to get new projects into the pipeline. So while I do, would appreciate if there were available funding to new projects, I wouldn't want it to be, on the backs of a couple of my projects that are, at advertising authorization. So I do think it's worth, continue conversation on how we balance new projects with existing. But that is definitely a a long-standing issue that we've not been able to change from funding existing projects first. And then that's pretty much it. I just wanted to see, just to state whether, that we hear what you're saying, Rhonda, and that, we're just, again, trying to work congenial in getting regional projects done. So with that, I'll just turn over to Madam Chair if we're gonna have the conversation today on the specific projects, that would be helpful.
I agree. Ms. Russell, I see your hands raised.
Thank you. I'm going to ask if Chet or Miles would speak to the directive of the policy board, the TPO policy board at their last meeting relative to recommendations for projects. Because that, I mean, I appreciate the comments about Ms. Amos and Ms. Clark about, working together regionally and in existing projects. My concern is, are we being consistent with their directive and considering project recommendations and being fully transparent? Maybe I misunderstood that directive, but I know Chet was there, Miles was there, Ms. Metler was there, just thinking about who was on that side of the room. And particularly as staff, right? I would dare not go in a different direction from a policy directive, right? So maybe I'm just misunderstanding what they asked of us. But my understanding, and that was such a heated discussion, I think Powhatan was a big part of that. And the biggest concern, even with existing projects and that litany of projects that we went through and the cost overruns for that project, the policymakers, or at least some of them, were leaning towards projects having to be revetted again, as opposed to continuing to be funded because of project costs that were significantly escalated from when they came into the pipeline. So, okay.
Mr. Parsons, if you could, I guess, go over what your understanding of the TPO direction was to TPO, or what the TPO's direction was.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. This was a discussion that the policy board has been having for a few months now, back into the fall. There's been, I'll say, widespread concern about cost overruns in general and what the cause was for lots of the projects that have been considered in the Richmond region in general. And the policy board this month had asked staff to come back with options for direction that could be given to TAC to come up with recommendations on how to address cost overruns through the work that the TPO is involved with. So Miles and his team put together the presentation that was shared last Thursday. And at the end of it, following the overview of individual projects and impacts, shared some metrics on which types of projects were impacting the cost overruns the most, and then presented 4, I'll say, multi-part preliminary options that could be sent to TAC for consideration. Those options weren't conclusive and comprehensive, but they could start the conversation and give TAC something to react to. So the policy board approved that, and that's what we were planning on addressing next month in full with you all. And those are, I think most everybody saw the presentation and it's posted on the website. But lots of different ways to look at it. That's part of why the discussion today was involving CBTA local and others, because I think the primary goal from staff's perspective is to fulfill the request that the policy board has given us, the direct request. And I think concurrently the direct request that has now been given to TAC to provide options for how to change the approach to reduce cost overruns in general. And I think we all can see that may change the guidelines, the policies that the TPO operates under in terms of these programs that we're discussing today, as well as others. And that'll also could possibly spill into CBTA policies and programs and how it operates. So I think this is a very broad topic that has been building for years. So it's not going to be easy to solve. But I think that the TAC has been asked to look at this from a comprehensive viewpoint and come back with options. I think the one thing that I wanted to say while I've got the mic is that one way, and if you look at the metrics from the presentation, one way to address the cost overruns overall would be to address the legacy projects. That would take some trade-offs in terms of current funding and recommendations. But if we could get the legacy projects off the books, that would greatly improve the overall forecast for cost overruns and could get us back to more of a grounded baseline, so that better direction could be had moving forward. Again, not an easy discussion to have, and there would be trade-offs between the 9 jurisdictions, but that staff feels pretty strongly that would help a lot if we could address the older projects that are currently causing the drain on RSTP CMAC as well as other sources. Hopefully that helped, Madam Chair.
Mr. Parsons, thank you for the update, the TPO directive. I hear this suggestion about legacies, but then there are some other localities who didn't submit their legacies this round. So, oh goodness, I think Austin, you were next and then Dirona. And if I messed up that order.
So I just had a couple overall thoughts while both Chet and Rhonda were talking. Is number one, I do agree that it's good at some point we do need to, I guess, zero out the existing log of projects to really meet the policy board's goal of controlling the cost overruns, because it's going to be hard to apply the new rules if we come up with new rules retroactively, especially on some really old legacy projects where the costs maybe were pre-TPO or pre-involvement of the TPO. But second thought, and kind of to Rhonda's point, is, how will it be received by the policy board if we come to them first with an ask for cost overrun funding before we come to them with any sort of discussion, at least about why those cost overruns are happening. I don't necessarily want us being accused of not doing our job at the February policy board meeting when we maybe come at it from that order. But having said that, I know there's deadlines. So we can't push this conversation until the March TAC, because frankly, we're not going to solve the answer of why cost overruns are happening in one meeting. It's going to take several meetings, and we can't just kick this can down the road where we lose the opportunity to complete these cost overruns and fully fund them in this coming cycle. So that's just two thoughts I had real quick.
I hear you, Austin. I agree. Yeah, and maybe we can talk about the schedule of like that. That's why I was trying to ask Miles, like if, and Liz had chimed in before, like if we don't take action on this today, but to your point, like how far, we're not going to solve, to your point, the TPO's directive all at our February meeting. So we're not going to be able to provide an answer on this. And how far could we push this down to March or April? Yeah. Dirona, please go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I guess I got a couple of comments. So I guess my first question is for Miles, just on if we don't fund, existing projects with these cost overruns, you said it would go on new applications. What's the funding year of those new applications that would even come in if we chose not to fund, these projects?
Sure. So we have everything from previous money. Part of our new policy is saving money in the current fiscal year so that we can cover cost increases or any surprises. So we would have money from FY23 on, and then any old closeout money. So we would actually have money across the entire 6-year program that we can move around and work with.
Okay, so that's not like considering, and then just thinking on what Austin was talking about just when he said zero out, I kind of cringed, and I'm thinking about, it wouldn't be just the legacy projects, it would be, all of the projects that the TPO is committed to fund, right?
Yeah, so that was kind of my thought is anything existing, and I specifically mentioned the legacy projects because I know they're kind of the source of some of the drain. I know we have a legacy project that's been a chunk of the cost increase specifically, but it's about zeroing out. It's about kind of finishing the jobs that have TPO money tied to them. And at that point, really only can we essentially get a new baseline to start with new. And I'm not saying we don't ever have new applications between now and when all these jobs are, fully funded, but it's hard to set that new baseline and really definitively move forward as an organization without completing those projects.
And I think that was somewhat of the purpose or the philosophy behind the policy on existing projects. And when you're talking a long dollar amount of projects, I mean, I can just think of, 2 or 3 that are like $50 million, when that ability to zero out and then not incorporating new applications within this 23, as Miles talked about, puts new projects at a further fiscal year than, I think the politicians would even accept. So I think that'll be something difficult we can work through, but we'll have to kind of look at how we address that. And then I think it may be possible to address the legacy projects. With the presentation, the recommendation from the TPO staff was to address projects, at least the ones submitted, was to use CVTA local funds. And I do think that there should be a process, or at least options, to use STBG funds to address those legacy projects and not just CVTA local, as we think about options to dealing with the cost overruns. But yeah, I do think that it is going to be a process to approach to reducing the cost overruns, mid-game, and how we're going to address that. And then, of course, with some of the legacy projects, with the STBG or RSTP being, a viable and sometimes the only source of funding for those projects in the past, I think is a lot of the reasons for that dependency on those funds and those cost overruns being, requested from the TPO. So we do want to kind of keep that in mind, that there was no one else to ask for money to get some of these projects done, as we can see with Ashland's request as well today. So, it wasn't as if localities always had, especially Richmond, always had available dollars to address those cost overruns in the past. And I think that that's somewhat that has led to, cost increase, as well as the time that it's been taking to actually implement or construct some of these projects. So again, I do think, like Austin says, that we are against the time, and whether or not we're going to come up with a logical discussion and talking through with the policy board on our recommendation of these existing projects today, for the sake of the time frame, then I think we can provide that explanation, and that what we'll be able to do in the future as we work towards, even if it's like the next round, the next people submit their legacy projects or whatever the case may be. But I think that we need to, keep the ball moving, so that at least some of these projects that are ready for construction can occur.
Okay, let's go one by one through these projects as we were talking about. Miles, if you could start with the Route 360 widening, please. Go ahead, Joe.
Yes, thank you. And didn't mean to butt in front, Miles. I've been holding my comments because I was going to wait until we got to our sole application. A lot of good discussion. This is obviously complicated. I think each project is unique, has its own unique story. And that's what I think our challenge is trying to find something that can uniformly apply to all these various types of projects. I mean, you can see that this one is a legacy. Actually, 2004, it actually dates back to the late 90s. So it's been around a while, has a long history. I think just in general, Hanover's view on this has always been a partnership with the TPO and the state in terms of funding. And in this particular case, I did crunch the numbers, and the overall funding is comprised of just about a little over 25% state or other funds, 25% local funds, and just under 50% of TPO funding. And I think that's kind of the sweet spot is somewhere in between a minimum of 25% local contribution to maybe as high as 50%. We have several projects where we're 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, which I think is kind of neat because everybody has a little bit of skin in the game. On this particular project, to one of Barb's questions, this project has been awarded. So we are fully funded, in fact, and the request would simply supplant some local funds that we assigned in order to award the project. And in full disclosure, I had a conversation with Miles when we were doing applications, and he advised that other localities were submitting projects in which he believed that there were some other funds available. And because I had initially discussed this one with him and had withdrawn it for that reason, but put it back in. In fact, the shortfall that we covered was 3.2, but again, along the lines of having some skin in the game, the request is only 1/6, so it was half of what the shortfall was at the time. And again, everybody has these challenges. Since awarding the project and fully funding it, we have penciled in an additional $6 million in local CVTA funding to cover a pretty substantial, as a contingency on a pretty substantial right-of-way case that's pending. I don't know how you anticipate these things. I don't know how you budget for something like that. The request is astronomical compared to what our valuation is, but it is a risk and it's a reality. So, that's just something we have to deal with. So, golly, a lot said. I don't know that I have a recommendation. This project will move forward without it. But at the same time, I almost feel like, and this kind of gets more to the request from the TPO policy board is looking at just a flat rate inflationary adjustment for all of our existing projects. Okay. Because I think we could probably find that there's been somewhere in the neighborhood of in the past year, a 10 to 15% overall increase, and just make an adjustment to allocations across the board by 10 to 15% to account for that. There's no accounting for it. right now. It's just like, well, we know it's happening, but, figure it out. That'd be something I think would be interesting to look at a little bit closer. Those are my,
Yeah, I like that.
comments. Those are my comments at this point. I'd be happy to ask any questions you have about this particular project.
Go ahead, Barb.
Yeah, so I really appreciate the background on this project because it looks like there's, maybe 13 million in CMAQ and RSTP on the project, and the project's a $35 million project. All the rest of those fund sources, Hanover's gone after through Smart Scale or other ways, I don't know.
That's correct.
And really the shortfall they had was 3.2, and instead of asking for that, they asked for 1.6. They've got that wild card with a right-of-way condemnation hanging out there that you don't have any idea how that's going to come in. So all in all, this request is pretty modest compared to the investment that's being made with CMAQ and RSTP on the project compared to the other fund sources that are going to it. And that's just my take for this one.
Thank you, Barb.
Thank you.
Any other questions regarding this Route 360 widening?
I don't have a question. I just have something to point out really in support of the request for this particular project is the request for the deficit is only a little over 10% of the total TPO funding in there. So it's right in line with the guidelines of what I think TAC would approve anyway if it were under 10% as far as the TPO funding. So I think it's with what Barb said. I mean, it is a very modest request, and it's essentially the poster child, I guess, for how the funding breakdown ought to work, where there's pots of money coming in from a lot of places.
Thanks, Austin. And I guess just since it's over by 10.2%, by that 0.2 or over the greater than or equal to 10%, 10.0%, I guess it needs to go to TPO. But if it was less than 10.0%, it could just go to TAC.
Correct.
Go ahead, Barb.
Oh, forget it.
Okay. Next up is Commerce Road improvements. Dirona, did you want to?
Yeah. Thanks, Madam Chair. And Ms. Firestone, I have staff Lamont Benjamin. I think he may not be promoted as a panelist. He's an attendee, but just a little bit of background. I think
I just moved them up so they can speak to the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think the initial request from the TPO was $3.7 million, which was the gap. We know that the schedule actually has it at starting FY25, which is incorrect because with the advertising authorization, the project, we could start delivery in spring of 2023. And so with that, it's very much imperative that we are able to fund that bid for the construction. We've been trying to scrape up some local dollars and potentially have the ability to fund about 1.3 of that gap. But it would still leave about a 2.4, 2.5 gap that we would be requesting from the TPO for this request. Any additional questions anyone has on specifics, Lamont Benjamin, our engineer, is on the call to answer any questions.
Barb, go ahead.
So this project has been advertised and is waiting to be awarded or needs to be re-advertised?
It needs to be re-advertised. Right now we're waiting for a VDOT authorization to advertise. We did show a no post in order to get the approval for the advertisement. So we're just waiting for that. Just like Joe mentioned earlier, we would like to supplant some of the local funds with this request that we've asked through the TPO and also fund the shortfall on that. We were looking at utilizing some of the CVTA dollars to try to help with the shortfall, but this would definitely help us move the project forward and get it to construction in the early summer, late spring, depends on how soon we get the advertisement from VDOT.
Yeah. Okay, and there's no way to cut the project scope? Or is there? Or have you already done that?
No, there's no way to cut the project scope. This particular project includes the new bridge on Commerce Road, as well as the road improvements from Bellmead to Bells. That at this point, if we go back and start trying to look at things, it'll just be increasing the cost more in terms of design. Some of the things that have increased the cost on this has been some of the specification changes dealing with the railroad, because there are some railroad improvements as well. It took some time to get the construction agreement from the railroad, which further increased the cost because of some of the inflation rates that have been going on over the past year or so.
Okay, that's all my questions.
Thank you, Lamont and Barb. So Dyron, it was, I know that, so the original TPO funding request was about 3.77 million. And were you saying you were looking to try to get some local funding to reduce that request? Did I hear 2.4 million, or maybe I heard it wrong?
Yeah, that's our lowest amount that we can probably go down, but we did want to offer some, negotiation of coverage of that shortfall. Again, just showing that, again, we are all in this together to get it done.
And from a local perspective on this project, the local contribution is about $20 million. That's the expectation from VDOT for this project funding. And with this 3.7, it would definitely help to reduce the 20 million that's being required by the city.
Sharon, can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, please do.
Lamont, do you have in this current estimate a bid risk and a contingency, and do you know what those percentages are?
Yes, we do have a contingency. I don't have the information in front of me, but I could get that information over to you.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, with these projects that are right at advertisement and the estimates we're looking at, if a bid risk is in there in a good contingency, so that when bids come in and they're high, does the estimate already anticipate that the bids are going to be high, or are you going to be coming back saying, well, I only had 10% contingency on the project and my bids came in, I need more money? Just trying to figure out where we are with the estimate.
Well, we do have the 10% contingency, and we've also went through the iterations of the inflation rate increase with VDOT. So
okay,
those numbers are counted there.
Okay, so that's a good, very conservative estimate.
Yes.
So hopefully when you get your bids in, you're going to be good if you're using that number. Okay, thanks.
I would say so if we can get those within the next 6 months.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on to Jank Road.
All right, thanks, Madam Chair. This one I will also defer to Mr. Benjamin. But let's see, this one involves another railroad agreement being necessary to accomplish. I think there is a $3 million deficit ask for this project. Again, I think it is almost at the point of getting the advertising authorization from VDOT. And then there is some post-bid history. Solomon, if you could tell them a little bit more about this project.
Okay, so Jank Road, I know we came to the TPO and asked for funding previously on this one as well to get it to advertisement, and we did get the project advertised, and the project was awarded. However, dealing with some of the private utilities, Verizon and Dominion, who were supposed to have some of their lines relocated during construction or prior to the contractor getting started, they did not fulfill their obligation of getting those lines moved in time, which extended the time of the project, which we ended up canceling the bid because we didn't want to get hit with a bunch of claims and everything. So and with that, they did go out and they have relocated all of their lines. However, CSX came back in and say, hey, we need to have some redesign done near our tracks. So we went back and did those redesigns, and now we're waiting for CSX to give us our final construction agreement for the project so we can move forward to advertisement. So with the inflation rate increase, the redesign cost, and the timelines, this cost, the project has increased significantly. We came to the TPO asking for about $3 million now. However, the shortfall is about $6 million. So we are looking to bring some funding from the city to cover that $6 million gap. So once we get the construction agreement from CSX, we'll be able to move forward with requests to advertise the project for construction. And hopefully we can have that within the next month. So we've been pushing since I would say October to finalize things with CSX. However, they tend to work on their own timeline, but we're continuing to push them, and hopefully we can get something this month to close that out and move forward to construction authorization. So in terms of the schedule, what we're looking at is possibly a spring advertisement and say construction in the fall of this year.
Any questions for Mr. Benjamin?
I have questions.
Go ahead.
So this project, I think, started out as a widening project, and now
No,
no?
it was never a widening project. It was just I guess the description that was in VDOT's system or written on the 6-year plan. So the language said widening, but it was never a widening project.
Okay, but through the years, the scope has been dialed back because, you know, we see in 2009, the project cost was higher and then it dropped down. I think the city's already gone through like a scope reduction in anticipating that the project cost was just going to get worse. Is that kind of the history with it?
I can't really speak of 2009, but in 2011 is when I got involved on it, and basically it was the scope had pretty much been the same since 2011. Again, that escalation in cost, a lot of that had to do with the utilities and right-of-way issues.
Yeah. Okay. And this project also has gone through the VDOT inflation exercise.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so hopefully that the number that we're looking at is conservative and you'll get bids in that are in line with funding.
Yes, that's the expectation.
Thank you. If there's no other questions about Jank Road, Miles, if you could change the slide to North Ferrum signal and sidewalk project, please. Oops, sorry, did I skip one? Deepwater. Sorry, let's go ahead. Mr. Benjamin or Ms. Clark.
Deepwater Terminal Road extension. This is another one of our projects. It's not one of the legacy projects like Jank or Commerce, which are both the legacy projects that we love to get off the books. But Deepwater Terminal is another important project to us. However, the funding deficit isn't as large. But in terms of the schedule on this one, we're in the right of way and utility phase. So we don't anticipate this project going to construction this year. It could possibly go sometime next year. So the request, we'd love if this request could be filled, but if it doesn't get filled at this time, we could possibly work through this one.
Thank you. Barb, go ahead if you have a question.
I see there's some revenue sharing on this and it's not been maxed out.
Yes.
So,
there
and
is revenue share.
yeah, and this year's a revenue sharing application cycle.
Yep.
Is this a candidate? They, existing projects with revenue sharing usually get funded. So it seems like that would be a good way to close the gap with this one. Are you thinking about doing that?
Yes, yeah, it's definitely an option for us. In the scale of this one is our lower priority in terms of the RSTP funding. So revenue sharing would definitely be an option for us on this.
Yeah, okay.
Austin, go ahead.
Yeah, can the difference between the request and the actual deficit be explained? I guess, why are you asking for 400% more money than it seems you need?
I think there was some changes in the estimate between the project manager and the project coordinator at VDOT in terms of the information that was in the system. And that may be why there's such a difference in the deficit and the need.
Any other questions regarding Deepwater Terminal? All right, thank you, Mr. Benjamin.
You're welcome.
Now it's North Ferrum Road sidewalk and signal and sidewalk. So this is under design. It had started off as being administered by the locality. We were short PMs and we asked VDOT to help with administering it. So they are currently administering this project. This started off, just asking for RSTP funding on this project. And I think at the time, this is when Todd, I was not in this role at that time, but Todd, my understanding is that, we didn't want to ask for the full amount for this project for all phases, PE right of way and construction. And so we sought smart scale funding for the construction portion of this project. So I think this is about 70% RSTP funded and about 30% smart scale funded. So we were trying, since the beginning of this project to take the burden, some of the lift off of RSTP. We're still in the PE phase for this and looking at utility investigations. I think we have a PFI meeting with VDOT sometime this month about this. As we've gone through design with VDOT, we've had to cut the scope to try and keep this under budget. This was, Parham Road by Tucker High School at Homeview, and was supposed to go all the way up to Old Parham Road, which is just south of West Broad Street. And, due to ADA concerns and ProWag, we cut it back to end at Skipwith. And, just trying to save costs where we can, trying to make waivers for our right turn lanes instead of having 200-foot storage, 100-foot taper. We're trying to get waivers from our traffic engineering department so we can impact less properties. And so we're trying, and we're asking for a small percentage, which is still not, well, any money is a lot of money, but it's $204,000. And this approval could be handled by TAC, it's not go before TPO. And we had to not ask for our legacy projects like Sadler and Three Chop Road improvements because we were allocating our CVTA local funding for those increases, and just, issued a no post in the end, trying to get more RSTP funding to, cover the shortfall. But I'll open up any questions I can try and answer from the group. Go ahead, Barb.
Have you talked to VDOT about increasing the smart scale money, which I know is not an easy thing to do either? But, especially considering ProWag, that seems like a pretty justifiable reason for the cost increase.
That's not something that was really looked into. I think I may have made an offhand comment, when we were trying to cut the scope, but wasn't sure how feasible that was. So that was something I would have to bring up with the VDOT PM.
And I guess the advertisement is too far out to have gone through the VDOT inflation exercise at this point.
True. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to look at so many Parham Road projects. I'm trying to look for our advertisement date. Sorry, it's not jumping out at me at this immediate time. Yeah, we have not gone through the inflation.
Yeah, in the 6-year plan, it's looking like the earliest would be 2026.
That sounds right.
I was wondering from Liz if she could weigh in on the likelihood of getting additional district grant money on the project.
Yeah, I also just looked up the ad date. It looks like it's December of 2030 currently. At least award would be that, so ad would be a little bit before that. And as far as, and Sharon, I can totally talk with you offline on this. There's a threshold. If what you're going back to ask for is under the threshold, we can sometimes do that administratively, because the whole concept of smart scale is that the hope is some projects would come in under, knowing that some projects would come over. So we do have some balance that we can work with. If it's over the threshold, we'd have to go and present to the CTB and request that money. There's a big process in between that, but I think that the PM is this is Evan Roberts, I think, on this PM.
Yes,
yeah.
It is.
I think maybe you and I should have a quick call and just look at what we're dealing with, and I can give you some recommendations. I know that it's a lot of localities, it's not a great thing to do, just go back and ask for the money. But if it's necessary and it makes sense, the CTB does allocate additional funds sometimes.
Okay. And yeah, and sometimes it's tough to ask the CTB for additional money specifically for the project. And we can talk offline. I'll be happy to set that up with you and Evan Roberts and our project manager. And I did have on my spreadsheet, an ad of December 2026.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that too, about the 2030. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Liz and Barb.
Sure.
Okay. We already talked about the town of Ashland, with Nora, with the Route 1 improvements. So Miles, unless, or people had specific questions that maybe Miles may be able to answer, let's jump over to early Settlers Road, with Chesterfield with Barb.
So this project, we're at the very beginning stages. We're in design. Our request was really to be proactive in anticipating the inflation and market results that we're seeing with bids. It's less than 10% of the funding that's been allocated to the project. This project is 100% RSTP project. So that's where we stand on that. We certainly could hold off on this money and see how the project progresses and deal with it in another year. But, you know, we see the writing on the wall, and that's why we made this request.
Any questions about this project? All right, hearing none, let's move on to Libby Avenue Road Diet. So this is a, you know, it's STBG. This is, sorry guys, trying to run this and then do both. I'm struggling. RSTP funded project. You know, it's progressing along. The project's been scoped. We're still in PE. You know, we issued a local no post to move this along. This is, you know, Libby Avenue between West Broad Street and Bethlehem Road, repurposing it for road diet, roadway reconfiguration to accommodate bike lanes. You know, there's an adjacent development at Gumminick, Libby Mill, right next door. And, you know, there's some star studies on West Broad Street where we've been coordinating with the city. Anyway, you know, we're all trying to improve this area where it connects to West Broad Street and account for multimodal. So, you know, we're asking for $483,000 that it has come up as we've refined the design. Are there any questions? Go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, in the presentation, same question I had for the deep water terminal, the requested TPO funding is different than the estimate. Just, is there a reason why it's about 280 or $250,000 more?
I can answer that, Sharon. It's
Go ahead.
It's the no post. So because there's a no post on it, the technical deficit or gap is smaller than what the actual gap is, because the no post makes it look like it's fully funded.
So the 483 removes all no post funds on this project. Is that accurate?
Exactly. It's the deficit plus the no post.
Okay.
Good question. And thank you, Miles. That was my understanding as well. Go ahead, Barb.
And this project is going to construction in 24.
Right now, it was add in November 24, so start construction March 25.
Okay. And has it gone through the VDOT inflation exercise?
I do not believe it has. It was recently scoped. My answer would be no, but I can double check with the PM.
Yeah, it might be in the batch that's due like on the 16th next week.
I don't, I think the answer is no, but I'm happy to double check.
So this one, we've got some time on also.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
You had an email. with the
Next
time.
up, Miles, if you could cover or chat the RRTPO scenario planning pilot.
Yeah, it's on the same email.
Sure. Yeah, I could do that. When we first requested the funding to be identified for this project, we were of the assumption, this was during COVID, that the scenario planning project would be a component of the long range plan, the 2045 long range plan. That did not happen because of the need for additional engagement, which we didn't think was right to ask for while people were still virtual. So pushing that off to its own standalone project changed the scope, and we additionally added more engagement opportunities to involve a stakeholder committee and public engagement and other things, and those raised the prices and the cost, and the bids came in to reflect those changes in the scope.
So the additional engagement was about 350,000 increase for additional public engagement, and now I guess that was one of the reasons. And
That was part of it. The scope also added some more responsiveness to feedback from the long range plan in terms of modeling greenhouse gas emissions and some other things that we got feedback from the community on. So we thought that it would be good to be responsive to that, and added that to the scope.
And I guess I'm trying to understand what the scenario planning pilot does. How does this help other existing projects or the region?
It's a way. It's recommended for all MPOs across the country to do this by federal highway. We wanted to follow that guidance and put it in place, but it's essentially a way to assess the impacts of a transportation improvement on not only the rest of the transportation network, but also land use and policy decisions, zoning, environmental impacts, other factors in the development world, to show how transportation decisions impact other things. So you can basically develop future scenarios for different types of resulting decisions and see what the impacts are from a transportation decision. We have a stakeholder committee that is established and will start meeting in 2 weeks, or maybe it's next week. And there's membership from a number of folks on this call, as well as other subject matter experts in other areas.
Thank you. Go ahead, Barb.
So scenario planning, I thought, was sort of to get input on the future vision of an area in relation to transportation. So, if you're trying to anticipate, trying to figure out the best way to support economic growth, if that is the priority in your region, then how would you do that? Or if your focus is more on freight and industry movements, how would you accomplish that? Is that right?
Yes, partially. The idea is to come up with multiple future visions. If you've been involved in the long range plan up to this point, it's been one future vision. And this is a way to select projects that are more resilient and can meet future realities that may be all across the board. For example, a future vision could be 75% work from home, local commuting patterns, high density development, sea level rise is all over the place. And that's one thing to address with a transportation project. The other future vision could be sprawl is rampant, low density development is happening. Everybody, 90% of people have private vehicles. Part of the process over the next few months is to develop what those future scenarios might be. And then we build the models as the big component of this project that can actually test how project decisions react to those types of things.
Are there planning funds through VDOT that you can go after?
We have not been able to identify any.
But you've been trying to do that?
Yes.
Madam Chair,
And-
this is Veronica.
Oh, sorry, can I ask one more thing?
Yes.
Does VDOT have like an on-call that does scenario planning?
VDOT could answer that. We have done some extensive research, and the project that we have outlined and scoped has not been done anywhere else as far as we could find. And the proposals that were received reflected that. So this is kind of a chance for our MPO to be out front and provide an example that other regions in the country could follow. And frankly, we're excited about that. But that's kind of the reality of where we are. Hampton Roads just developed a scenario planning project, but it was solely focused on transportation and was not designed to be useful for other areas such as the planning department or economic chamber or other folks that might see benefit from this.
So, okay, well, that expands my questions a little bit. So this is something that is beneficial to the chamber and planning departments. Are they contributing to the cost?
They're not contributing to the cost. They're contributing to the development and basically the sweat equity.
Providing staff, helping to get the word out.
Yes, staff and time.
Liz, if you could chime in and maybe about any district planning grants.
Sure.
for that.
It's been a while, Chet, since we've talked about this, so I can't remember exactly what all the steps we went through. Most of our study programs are either for project specific, and it starts off with having to meet a need, like a V-Trans need. We do have a general on-call. And if I recall, Chet, do you remember we asked them the first time we asked them, they didn't have capacity, they being our central office planning, sorry, who they manage all of the on-call contracts for STAR studies and AMP and all that. And if my memory serves me, and I can go back and look to be sure, there was not capacity under the on-call program this would have fit under. If there wasn't capacity, and if I recall, TMPD didn't support it. Chet, do you remember?
Yeah, that's correct, Liz. Yeah.
Okay. Simply because it doesn't fall under a specific V-Trans need. And I think the knee jerk was to use the PL funding for the UPWP work program.
Yes, and we do have
Right.
through staff time committed to this project, lots of the PL funding as well.
Yeah.
That might be a good thing to convey when we're talking to the TPO about the project then.
Sure. Yeah, good point. Thank you.
And Chet, if it's helpful, I can get some more like bullet points on our kind of our policy of what we fund, if that will be helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Dirona, did you have a question?
Yeah, I know with Richmond, we're undergoing our Richmond Connects, and we have, scenario planning as a part of our process. And I did hear Chet say that it would expand past transportation, but will you be utilizing localities' own scenarios in your process?
Absolutely. And I just had a meeting last week with Kelly at Richmond Connects to understand what the goals are for that project and how we could be working together.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, I appreciate everybody hanging in. It's been over 2 hours for this meeting so far. There was an action proposed, whether we are gonna what the TAC was gonna recommend. I think it was super helpful to go through these projects individually and hear from the jurisdictions, some of the background. Would we want to consider this an informational item, or what direction would folks like to do? Austin, your hand's raised. Please go ahead.
I'll suggest, I don't know if it needs to be a motion or not, but we, I guess, defer action until next month and take this along with an initial discussion about the cost overruns that the policy board kind of tasked us to undertake, at least simultaneously to them. So it would just be pushing this action back 1 month to at least, show that we're making the effort to tackle cost overruns simultaneously.
Thank you, Austin. And Miles, I think you had indicated during this presentation conversation that I think Liz had chimed in that pushing it back 1 month would be fine. And I see Chet has his hand raised too, if you want to default to him.
Yeah, thank you. I'll let Miles answer that question, but I think my request of the TAC is staff feels like we've done the research that the policy board has asked us to do. Is there anything additional in terms of materials or background that would be helpful for you all to have to gear up for next month? I think having the discussion next month with the idea of coming to a resolution is pretty, it's biting off a lot, but we certainly want to do whatever we can to facilitate that. And a lot of the expertise, at least on the projects, as you've heard today, is coming from you all. So we made that clear with the policy board that it would take the information that each jurisdiction could provide to really inform the decision that needs to be made, or the recommendation that needs to be made.
And I know there's 2 items. You're talking about the project cost estimates from the TPO, and then we have, and I agree, it would be difficult to have an answer on that next time. And then we have the existing projects, STBG, CMAC. So I see Barb had her hand raised first.
Yes.
And it was Liz. Barb, go ahead.
I was wondering if maybe in the next month, Miles could have discussion with the localities, thinking about the TPO's question about why have these projects cost increased. Miles could have discussions with the localities to put together a shorter narrative about that. I do feel like Forest Hill, I kind of remember that when I was new to VDOT, and it was a larger scope project, and the way that I remember it is, the cost just kept going up, and so eventually the scope was cut. So even though, you still see that progression, it could have been way worse if the project scope hadn't been cut. And I think there's stories behind each of those projects that explain things, and Miles did a good job of also explaining that the way we did things in the past is different than the way we're doing things now. And kind of having that information too would help to bring a report back to the TPO on why the project cost estimates have gone up.
And help the February meeting run more smoothly. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so if we could, maybe do some work between meetings with conversations with localities to get that history. Then when we get back together as a TAC, we'll have that all put together to review.
And if I can remind everyone, the other directive from the policy board was at the end, they would like a spreadsheet that summarizes every project and an explanation as to why the costs have changed on that project. So I think that this lines up with that effort, which is kind of task 2 of what the policy board has directed. So not any comment on when we can do it, but I think that in terms of the task, that's definitely part of what we've been asked to do.
Do we have, Miles, has there been a spreadsheet started that kind of could be routed with a column so that, the jurisdictions could start filling in some bullet points or some reasons in that spreadsheet for why the costs have increased? Or
we can put that together and send it out.
Liz, you were first, and then Chet.
And mine's just, I want to make sure before we wrap up that I have a good handle on what the alternative schedule would be. If we're pushing it out a month, so we would then be asking for TAC action in March, or would that be asked after the TPO meeting? We would ask for TAC action in February and then TPO action in March, or later?
My intent was TAC action in February, policy board action, I guess, in March.
Okay.
And if we were able to push it, if we needed to, I agree. If we, with, Austin was saying, action by TAC in February and TPO in March. But if we needed to push it to TAC action in March and TPO action in April, I guess that's getting closer to that May.
It is, but the TPO meets so early that if they were to do that. So what we really need is some action on a draft, because we have to put up what we call the draft gen mod. We have to put the numbers in, and we do that in March. And we don't really like to hit submit on that, even though it's a draft, without having at least TAC level action. But yeah, so if TAC acted in March for TPO April, I think we'd still be able to get the draft in by the deadline. It's usually middle of March. So we would just have to plug it in like as soon as the TAC meeting happens. That could happen. The first scenario would be best. February and then March would be ideal, but obviously we don't live in an ideal world always.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Chet, please go ahead.
Thank you. So March 14th, I believe, would be the TAC meeting, Liz. The other thing I needed to say is I just to be protective of staff. If you look at item 13, which we'll get to next, we're going to have our hands full over the next few months. So we'll do everything we can to support that. And I like the spreadsheet concept so that everybody has a chance to fill in detail to that. But we will certainly do everything we can to communicate and have those conversations as Barb suggested.
I think I saw Dyrona's hand, and then I'll go back to Liz.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, I think today we still made strides with going through the projects. And, we could potentially, I think even through the process, at least the deep water terminal, and I thought I heard one of Barb's projects, could potentially hold off. So I think we have a short list that we could take into the next meeting, at least, to then add the components of the, because I don't know if creating that other spreadsheet and trying to tackle all the projects right now, or at least just showing the ones that we've shortlisted, the reasons beside it, like Barb said. And so maybe even any action in agreeing with the short list, and that, full approval would come after you speak to the localities. And we also discuss preliminarily some of the broader issues that the TPO has, policy board has. Because one thing we don't want to do is make it as if we have the solution to this very hard problem, and that we're going to be able to get it in the next 4 months, or, we could. But again, giving that indication is going to put a lot on everyone. So at least I think I mean, we did have a 2-hour meeting today. And I, at least, like I said, I think that a short list of the approved projects with the approved amounts, even if we don't have the amounts right now, we just say that we are still considering those projects. And by the next meeting, you have the dollar amounts that the localities have agreed that they can put local amount, if any, on. And then we move forward. That's just something, really just trying to get something out of today, if at all possible.
So maybe each of the localities, sorry, I saw Barb's hand go right as I started talking. So if maybe each of the localities could provide who are on this list, who submitted existing project applications, could provide that information to Miles with what the final proposal is, or their recommendations, just so if we agree to put this on the February or March agenda, that we have more information. Is that what you're kind of?
At least some indication, because like I said, we had 2 hours, people talked about the project. I mean, other than literally writing it down for, documentation, even though we have it recorded right now, but is really the reasons that the localities are going to have for the project overruns that they requested through the application process. So again, if we don't want to, take any action, that's fine. And we leave everything. But I think, it's going to be some recapping, and this kind of helps you out with more information.
Barb, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that there are 5 projects that I would be okay in recommending that we fund based on the discussion that we had today. And, if that conversation could be put down in some bullet points, justifying the reason for moving forward with the request for existing project funding, I feel they're justified. I do think that there are about 4 projects that can wait and see how things settle out. We'll probably be back needing additional funding, but it's not something that we need to act on straight away. So I'd be okay moving forward with something. I know that's not the motion on the floor.
I don't think, well, he said he doesn't know if he needs it in the form of a motion, but it from Mr. Austin, and what he stated. But I think based on the conversation, if we could have Mr. Goy amend his motion with, potentially those 5 projects, along with the items of costs for a number of projects if possible, and a discussion on the policy board and the overall cost overrun process at the February meeting, but to move that these 5 projects be moved forward, I guess, in recommendation.
Can those 5 be highlighted, Barb? Can you just let me know which 5 you're talking about real quick? I've got them in a
Sure.
spreadsheet.
Yeah, so we've got the Route 1 in Ashland, 360 in Hanover, Commerce, Jenk, scenario planning.
Sure. Yeah, and just for a point of clarification, I mean, my initial motion, if it was a motion, wasn't not in support of funding any or all of the projects. It's just concern that once it gets to the policy board, that their directive last week was to figure out what's happening with costs. And our first response to that is asking for more money instead of any discussion at all on why the costs are increasing.
Well, I think that we would convey the discussion that we just had on these projects. I think we've had good discussion and, you know, there's some logical reasoning with the projects, you know, that they've gone through VDOT inflation exercise, you know, the estimate should be nice and conservative to allow the project to move to construction. And, you know, I think we could summarize that discussion.
No, and I don't disagree with anything you just said. I know, for instance, my TPO representatives are very concerned with the VDOT inflation exercise and how they get to those numbers. So it's just a perception thing. It's how do we justify perception wise asking for money before we talk about why we need more money in the grand scheme of things, not specifically to each individual project.
But I'm not saying we would ask for money without discussing the issue. It would be hand in hand. I guess the way to kind of explain it is here's a little microcosm of projects. And here's the example. So we do have the big list of projects that we need to address. But we do sort of have this existing issue in a daily kind of scenario, and we can't just go ask for the money. We need to give the justification for it.
Goodness. Go ahead, Dirona.
I was just gonna ask, Madam Chair, if we could get in on whether it was a motion or not by Mr. Going.
I don't know if I made a motion or not. It was just a recommendation. I certainly can. I do feel that we should, not just because we can push it back a month. So I guess I will formally say I move that we defer action on this item until the February TPO TAC meeting. Not that that's not in support of any of these projects. In fact, I probably support almost all of them, probably with the exception of Deepwater getting the request. But for right now, I think that's the motion that I want to put forward.
I'll second that.
Okay, and as far as discussion, and just to clarify, the motion was to defer, sorry, to put action to the February agenda, and and we have a first from Austin, a second from Barb, and then I see Ms. Russell as far as discussion after the motion, and this may be after the fact. Ms. Russell just put something in the chat. Barb, not sure I understand your comment that we had the conversation about cost overruns. I disagree with that position. Ms. Russell, did you, with this motion, does that?
Yes, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I saw Dirona's hand and then Barb. So Dirona, please go ahead.
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you for discussion. And, you know, I too will be voting in agreement with this. As Barb clarified for me and went through even the 5 projects. I mean, I think that fair lens on not just 5 that we've highlighted, but maybe because I think I'm more in support for everyone's request that came through on the existing to be funded. So I guess along with my rooster, I'll say that I'm okay with the motion that's made. Thank you.
Thank you, Dirona. And I like the rooster in the background. Yeah, I know we need to wrap this up. It's calling it time. And then Barb Smith just responded in the chat. I was referring to today's discussion about the overruns on these particular projects. Is there any more discussion? Otherwise, I will ask Ms. Firestone to do a roll call vote. Wait, we don't need to do it. We're just deferring it, right? Or do we? Yeah, I guess we do need to vote to. Chet, help.
I don't think there's any need to vote.
Okay, we're just deferring to the February agenda. Okay.
Staff is taking direction to develop the February agenda.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your patience and the great discussion. And you feel free to follow up with Miles if there's like additional bullet points that may be helpful for the next meeting, not to give him more work, but just to, if there's any modifications to how much localities are asking. All right, I will move on to item number 13, which is fiscal year 24-27 Transportation Improvement Program project list. This has been amended in the agenda to be an informational item only. Please go ahead, Miles.
Thank you again, everyone, and I promise this one will be quick. So no action is requested today. Originally, we had scheduled for the TAC to review the project list for the new draft tip, which we'll be approving later this year. However, there has been a delay in the development of the tip data. We were originally expecting it in late November, early December, but it's now going to be released in mid-January. So we've been coordinating with Tri-Cities and VDOT to update the schedule for tip development and conformity. This slide shows sort of the original schedule for all of our next milestones and what we're looking at right now. Essentially what we've done is we've just pushed all the meeting dates back a month, and then our public review moved back by 2 weeks. This will require a special TAC meeting at some point in late April to approve the conformity report, or recommend approval of the conformity report and the draft tip for TPO approval still in May. So more detail to follow as we get more information. We'll keep you updated. But as of now, we've just largely pushed everything back a month. So happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for Miles? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to transportation agency updates. Thanks, Ms. Davinsky, for hanging in with us. DRPT, please go ahead.
I'll be brief because I feel like 2 hours for TAC is quite a bit. But just as a reminder for everyone, DRPT's fiscal year 2024 grant applications are available through February 1st. I think in the past, I reminded everyone that in addition to our standard capital and operating assistance programs, we do have available special programs that includes technical assistance, demonstration, and our workforce development programs. And localities and MPOs are eligible applicants for those. If you are interested in running some transit or rail service, the demonstration program is also an option. But if you have questions about that, you are still able to submit an application. I think we still have about 2.5, 3 weeks left. Please feel free to reach out to me or any of your DRPT contacts. Particular to TAC, this is more of a staff reminder, but are any of your transit performance targets, those were approved, I believe, back in October. You have until about March 30th in order to incorporate those into your tip. So that was kind of timely to come after a quick update on the tip. If you need a copy of the language as well as the targets, you may reach out to me, and I can also connect you with our lead, who is Woods Hudson, on the performance targets. But after you do the incorporation to your tip, please provide a copy of that for us so that we may have that on record for any kind of audits or compliance. Besides that, I did mention at the policy board that our communications team was hosting a workshop that was held yesterday. They did release a copy of the PowerPoint as well as a YouTube recording of the workshop. So if you were unable to attend it and you would like to still listen in and see what kind of resources we have available in terms of marketing and promotion for public transportation, please feel free also to reach out to me and I'd be glad to send it your way. Otherwise, that's it for my agency update, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for DRPT? Thank you, Tiffany. Next is GRTC. Mr. Robinson, please go ahead.
All right, yeah, just a couple of quick updates. In regards to the North-South DRT study, there is a scheduled stakeholder and technical advisory committee meeting scheduled for January 20th. And we are working on gathering data for that. And then for the Western BRT study, Plan RVA staff is conducting that study for us, and they finished an online survey last month and have a stakeholder meeting, I believe, this evening. And then just to reiterate, I believe I touched on it last month, but the next scheduled service change or booking change for the GRTC is at the end of this month, January 29th. So when it goes into effect, the main change in this booking is regarding routes 1, 1A, 1B, and 1C, with truncation of those routes at the downtown transfer plaza. And that's it.
Thank you. Any questions for GRTC?
Well, Madam Chair, I have one quick question.
Please go ahead.
Corey, when, what's the estimated open date for the downtown transfer center? Interim downtown transfer.
That is a good question. It's still under construction. I know that we've just installed some banners with coming soon, so it's sooner rather than later, but I think it's still working on lighting, amenities, and like technology updates in the area. So I don't have a established date as of right now, but
I think it's April.
April is the booking in which, yeah, the downtown transfer station will go into effect. I don't know the exact date, but yeah, it should be around April.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Next up is Mr. O'Keefe with Ride Finders.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll also keep mine brief. We are continuing to work with VDOT on the replacement of the 5 missing ride finder signs that were located along, interstates and, major routes. The number was 6 when I last reported it, but I was quick and replaced one of those. So still working with them on 5 of those. We are also working with the City of Richmond's Office of Equitable Transit and Mobility to provide their clients with the Ride Finders Emergency Ride Home pilot program. The City of Richmond pilot program offers free rides to the 10 eligible neighbors who live in RRHA properties, and we're working with Darana and her team on assisting them with the Emergency Ride Home pilot program we have. We had a good meeting with them last month, and I believe we're moving forward with that. We also reported the results of our DP facilitated triennial compliance review at the GRTC Ride Finders board of directors meeting. And last but not least, one of our own, Brigitte Carter, was recognized by the Association for Commuter Transportation as a behind the scenes award TDM champion. And with that, Madam Chair, that's all I have, and I'll be glad to answer any questions anyone have.
Thank you, John. Any questions for Ride Finders? Hearing none, VDOT, Ms. McAdory, please go ahead.
Great. John, I just want to say thank you for the gentle reminder. I owe you an email on those signs, so I'll shoot you something back this week. All right, so real quick, I think you guys, many of you may have already seen some of these presentations. Nicole mentioned that it may have been on the last agenda, so I will try to be quick as well. The December CTB, there's a list of 3 presentations, Trails Office, TAP, and then the screening for round 5. They're basically just talking about how validation went. Then the action meeting, they revised the 6-year plan, which they normally do every year with transfer, or every month with transfers. There was one, they approved the addition of the Fall Line Trail. I gotta scroll my thing over, hang on. Oh, that was just the final. They actually officially put the CBTA's money into the 6-year plan for the design build 1, just in time for advertisement. They also, for design build 2 for the Fall Line Trail, the CTB has to approve the official location. That was done in December. And then some amendments on the urban maintenance construction policy, as well as special structures program. And all of those presentations are available at the links. Next meetings are January 17th and 18th. If any changes to that, Nicole will keep you guys abreast of that. For Smart Scale, most of you know, validation concluded at the end of December. There's still a couple of things we're tweaking here and there, but scoring is underway, and should be taken to the CTB this month, the draft. And that's basically just a raw scores list. They're presented that And then the next couple of months is when they meet and make decisions over which projects will get selected. And that usually happens in May or June. It's time to start talking about, we've already done it, but the 6-year program for FY24 is, we're starting preparations for that. Obviously, when we talked about the RSTP and CMAC monies and the action for February and March action, that's what that relates to, is the schedule for the SIP development, which will go live July 1. And then a quick fall line update. The design build 1 up in the Chickahominy River, Chickahominy River crossing was advertised as scheduled on the 13th. There's a link to the advertisement. It closes, I think, in March. We're still anticipating to begin construction mid-year or later, like early fall of this year. And then, as I mentioned before, design build 2, the approval for location was done by the CTB, and we're pushing advertisement out a little bit. We had originally said mid 23. It's looking more like later 2023. We're probably going to end up doing 9-month increments instead of 6-month increments, just because that's how it has worked out. And then most of you already know this, that the CBTA, when they approved their regional scenario, they approved all the rest of the money they had to allocate for the fall line trail was allocated. And there are no public hearings currently in the TPO area. And that's my update, unless there's questions.
Thank you, Liz. Any questions for VDOT? All right, hearing none. Number 15 on the agenda is future meeting topics. Janice, if you could update or remove that one, I think it says the January 5th policy board in the agenda. So if you, I guess update to remove that, but also some future meeting topics is like what we discussed for the February meeting would be STBG, CMAC, existing project allocations, and the project cost estimates for the direction of TPO. I guess the TIP projects list, I guess, would also be on the February agenda as well, Chet. See you nodding. Okay. And if there's any other requests to be added to future meeting agendas, please just let us know. All right. Number 16, TAC member comments. I know I'm the chair, but one comment I just saw Chet send out a reminder to folks that the fall line trail wayfinding comments are due by the end of today. Chet, do you want to chime in?
No, that was only sent to the people on the fall line work
Okay.
group.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
so if that applies to you, please give me any comments. We've gone through it pretty extensively, but I'd love to hear any additional feedback.
Thank you. Any other TAC member comments? All right, hearing none, our next meeting is scheduled for February 14th. And this meeting is now adjourned at 11:48 p.m. Thank you all for your valuable time and your valuable input. I really do appreciate it. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Oh, Barb, sorry, I saw your hand raised, but I guess it's adjourned, but I'm happy to talk afterwards. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye-bye.